we can take a look at our very first player. We are going to start diving in onto Team Singapore's player. We've got Ying Kiat Tan, and they're going to be running that Wheezing team. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. As you kind of touched on before, a lot of the teams in the meta seem to be focusing around those like Arcanine, Rillaboom cores of the Tornadus. But we see here, as you mentioned out, that Wheezing and that Roaring Moon, an alternative form of speed control, that Roaring Moon and the Wheezing being able to lock down that Prankster with that neutralizing gas ability. And your Roaring Moon with its speed booster is able to get a Tailwind off first. And you can disrupt the field with things like Taunt as well. It's super interesting to see. And, in kind of the World Cup format as well, where it's you only have to bring a team for that week. A lot of these picks that may not do better in longer tournaments, they're perfect for World Cup.
Yeah, and I think we can say the exact same about their opponent when we also take a look at Team India. We've got Jasdil Singh Deo, who is going to be our second opponent in this matchup. And that's where I also look at this and I go, wow, like what a throwback here to see Glamora and Dondozo teams.
Yeah, and Glamora Dondozo, again, is another one of those teams where it has a niche in the same way that Wheezing Roaring Moon does, where the Glamora and the Dondozo, if you get it in a position, we've seen it on stream a couple times before, where if your Glamora is able to get up the Toxic Debris against something like that Urshifu, and you are able to switch it in, your opponent can slowly get whittled away by that Toxic status effect.
I think just the status effect in general is going to be really important, whether it is coming from like the toxic poison or of course the neutralizing gas. I feel like that is definitely something that we can talk about there as we get into this very first game between these two players. We will have to see how both of these teams interact with each other. And my eyes right now are immediately drawn to how much offensive pressure we're really seeing coming out from the Hearthflame Ogerpon and the Fluttermane, but that Weezing is making an appearance already.
Yeah, exactly like we talked about before, with that Wheezing, that Roaring Moon, that Unbreakable Duo, just being able to shut off all the abilities on the field with that neutralizing gas and that booster energy being displayed here. The Fluttermane is going to reveal that it's actually speed booster, so it is going to be able to match that Roaring Moon. And actually, if it has access to that Icy Wind, it will be able to, match, as we see on the team sheet, it has Icy Wind, so it is going to be able to match that Roaring Moon for speed control.
Which is nice when you have items like that because it does get around the opportunity for basically to like utilize, not I guess not even utilize your ability. So it can help to even up the playing field just a little bit, but you know that something else can't really come in here, like a sunny day that's not even available to really help be able to boost up that photosynthesis, but you're still able to hold your own. I'm worried a little bit about the Ogerpon in this position. I feel like it is just being threatened a lot by that Roaring Moon, and that's something that you might want to just kind of consider even just maybe terrestrializing away from. Let's see what's happening here.
Yeah, exactly. That fire terrestrialization there that we are going to see gives Ogerpon a boost, or would give it a boost if Weezing wasn't on the field. But it is, like you said, to kind of prevent something like an Acrobatics or even a Sludge Bomb from the Weezing coming out here and maybe doing super effective damage. But a double protect here on the Roaring Moon and the Weezing, just to scout out what maybe their opponent wants to do.
And that's such a smart scout out because you've already baited out the terrestrialization. You know that's going to be off the board for whatever is in the back. And then you can start to adjust for your own game plan. You also get to scout out too what this Fluttermane kind of wants to get up to. And I just wonder if maybe Yastil's going to have to kind of think about where to go from here. You have to start thinking turns ahead into the end game when you've already used your terrestrialization here on the Ogerpon.
Exactly, and I think for Dondozo, which Jasdil most likely has in the back here just from lead, a lot of the times when you want to set the Dondozo, you want something offensive like this Ogerpon and Fluttermane lead, where you're able to break down some of the threats that might be annoying for your Dondozo, like the Weezing, which is kind of the mainstay of this game, where it's able to shut off all those abilities with neutralizing gas. I'll repeat it over and over again, but it's so important because Dondozo, relies on its ability for that commander and that boost. And Ogerpon even for its own ability too. So if you are able to get rid of this Weezing, if you are Yasdiel, this is a huge opportunity.
Maybe this is going to be one way to do it. It's a Roaring Moon, though, that's going to start to get in the way. It is terrestrializing to the Flying Terra type, which is going to boost up so much of that damage that we could see come out from something like the Acrobatics. And that's the move that's going to be locked into as well, as that's just going to be targeted down into the Fluttermane. It's not able to get the knockout just yet, but it allows the Fluttermane to fire back, but that Roaring Moon is no longer weak to that attack.
Exactly, and in the same way that Jasdil terrestrialized fire to avoid maybe an acrobatics and a sludge bomb, they actually choose to double the roaring moon slot, which I think was an excellent choice. Realizing that even if you're hitting a fire move into the dragon type, right, that one of those amazing double ups where you're able to cover for a terrestrialization on the roaring moon, and because Ying had terrestrialized this turn, or they had protected last turn, excuse me, they were able to go for that double up pretty safely. But a sludge bomb there going for a trade on the Fluttermane, and both players getting a KO this turn.
If it is that Dondozo and the Tatsugiri in the back, you're still in a bit of a pickle. You have to get rid of that wheezing, but there are a lot of threats in the back that we could see there that Ying Kiat actually brought to this first game that are going to be very problematic. You have the water Ogerpon that's going to be on the field now with a Wellspring Mask. That's going to be able to do super effective damage there to the Ogerpon on the other side. And the Tatsugiri is the big tell that there's probably that Dondozo lurking.
Yeah, unless they decide to bring Tatsugiri with no Dondozo, which, is a valuable
Bold.
option. It has Scarf, right? Something like Icy Wind or Draco Meteor. If you really just need strong, fast special attack damage like that, it's right there. But like you said, I think Dondozo is in the back. But Tatsugiri's on the field now just to do some damage and maybe get some speed control down with Icy Wind or maybe firing off a Draco Meteor. Again, like you said, to get rid of this Weezing so Dondozo can come in safely.
Another defensive play coming out here from Ying Kiat. It's going to be that spiky shield just to help protect it away, and then the double protect coming through from the Weezing. So this is just another very safe turn. Can fish out the fact that with that Choice Scarf, this Tatsugiri is going to lock itself into the Icy Wind, which will be a great way to help mitigate some of this speed differential, and also make sure that this Hearthflame Ogerpon is going to have the best chance that it can at success before it gets knocked out.
But I think Ying Kiat playing just super safely, again, going for those double protects when there's a Choice Scarf Pokemon on the field, just to see what they want to lock into, kind of get in the mind of their opponent and figure out maybe what their game plan is and how they want to play. There's no reason to risk anything like an Icy Wind speed drop and potentially lose another Pokemon like your Roaring Moon. I think you're in such a good position as long as you preserve your Weezing, that's kind of what you want to play around. And if that means playing a little bit slower and you're not necessarily taking a KO every turn, I think that's super beneficial here.
Absolutely, because then you're putting Jasdil once again on a back foot. You still have potentially this Dondozo in the back that can't be brought in under these circumstances, but you know that you can play around this Icy Wind. Yes, you do get the speed drop onto the Weezing and the Ogerpon, but can you even get enough damage down onto this Ogerpon or even this Weezing to be able to get the knockout? It's going to be going down into the Ogerpon, and you know what? I take it back. Hearthflame Ogerpon is still one of the strongest Pokemon in the game, even if it's going to be going into neutral damage.
Yeah, a lot of people have been kind of sleeping on Ogerpon. It's gone off and on in terms of usage, but when I see that kind of damage go into an Ogerpon, it is a neutral hit, but that's still so much damage. And even without the +1 that it gets from because of the Weezing, it's still doing so much damage with that terrestrialization, allowing its Ivy Cudgels to hit so hard.
Yeah, and look at that too. We were talking about status effects coming through from something like the Glamora on Jasdil's side, but it's the Weezing that's actually going to get the poison down onto Jasdil's Ogerpon and put a timer on it. So it doesn't have a whole lot longer to be in this game, but if it can keep scoring knockouts like it has onto the Roaring Moon and the Ogerpon Wellspring, then it's going to be in a very nice position.
And that's really funny because I think Jasdil is maybe one of the maybe wanted to be in the position where they had something like the Glamora to set the toxic spikes and get that toxic effect. But to see the Weezing toxic your own Ogerpon is not. You don't want to really be setting yourself on your own timer when you're playing Dondozo. You want to be making sure you are putting pressure on your opponent. But we are going to see Ivy Cudgel actually correctly call the Protect. I think this time into the Fluttermane or it's in the Weezing going into the Fluttermane instead.
Exactly. Look at that. Like a great call here. And now Jasdil has identified that a nice win condition here is honestly just leave the Weezing by itself. It is not putting on that much offensive pressure. All it really is adding to this particular game is a bunch of utility. Look at its moveset. It really only has Sludge Bomb as a damaging option. And if you're able to leave it on its own, then that's it. It cannot chew through the rest of your team, especially if you know you have a Pokemon that is as tanky in the back as Dondozo, or even, let's say, the Iron Hands. That could have also been waiting in the wings. And we'll see if that might be the same game plan that Jasdil is going to want to rely upon as we get into this game number 2.
Yeah, and I'm very excited to see the adjustment maybe from Ying Kiat as well. Is maybe if they, like, Weezing Roaring Moon wasn't necessarily a bad lead. I just think we wanted to see a little bit more a offensive pressure where you or not, excuse me, not pressure, but making more offensive decisions. We saw the defensive plays, but I think I want to see a little bit more of offensive plays. Maybe just Roaring Moon going for an attack off the bat.
I agree with that. I feel like Ying Kiat did definitely play it safe, and so there was a really good opportunity, I think, even in that first turn. Instead of just fishing out the terrestrialization from the Hearthflame Ogerpon, you can just go for damage. We did end up seeing Jasdil, though, very correctly doubling into the Roaring Moon on that second turn after it had also committed its terrestrialization. So that took such a key piece of offense already just off the board. And so maybe he is able to make an adjustment in the second game.
Yeah, and we see the Ogerpon and Fluttermane there from Jasdil as well, just putting offensive pressure, again, matching that Weezing, just forcing Ying Kiat, I feel like, into those defensive positions where you feel like you have to double protect because there's just so much pressure, and if you do lose pieces, you find yourself in a situation where you are in game one. And Jasdil has done a great job of that, I think, putting on that offensive pressure from turn one. It's kind of inherent with Ogerpon, as we see this terrestrialization here, again, putting on that same amount of pressure, kind of not really giving Ying Kiat any room to breathe here.
I would have almost liked to see something like the Landorus, just to be able to help control some of that attack that this Hearthflame Ogerpon could come out with. If you're expecting that this Hearthflame and Fluttermane lead is going to come out again in game number 2, maybe it is a Weezing choice. Maybe you leave it at home. Bring in the Landorus instead. It still has to deal with a lot of different threats on Jasdil's team, but you have a much better way of dealing with something like the Ogerpon if you're able to bring it in.
Yeah, and we saw last game how Jasdil's Pokemon were kind of EV'd, that it actually lived that acrobatics. So I think going for that Sludge Bomb there, Ying Kiat was able to get that Protect, calling the double up there. The Weezing able to get that Sludge Bomb. So if Roaring Moon does decide to Terrasilize and go for an Acrobatics, we know from the damage calculations in game one that Acrobatics might have a chance to KO this Fluttermane. But that Ogerpon is, if you do decide to Terrasilize and commit to your Flying Terror, it's going to be doing so much damage.
You do get rid of that just natural defensive capability that Roaring Moon would have. And a great point as well, that just being able to chip down even a little bit more with something like the Weezing, especially knowing that Jasdil had a tendency to leave it alone, and you're also going to get the double protect, that is huge. The Fluttermane is going to be able to protect itself too, but does this Hearthflame Ogerpon get a chance to get any damage down?
It does not, unfortunately. As Jasdil correctly calls, the most likely what they were calling was that Terraflying Acrobatics, as we talked about. Protecting the Fluttermane makes a lot of sense there. This Weezing is not going to be able to get to do anything, though, with that Fluttermane Protect. I think maybe they Sludge Bombed in that slot, thinking they would just get a little bit more chip. They weren't too confident in the Acrobatics play. Getting a double Protect there, it's, again, you're not really advancing the game if you're in Ying Kiat's position, or Ying Kiat's position. You're not able to get out of this position, I feel like, with the Ogerpon or Fluttermane without losing a piece. And I think Jasdil is doing a great job of that with that Terrifier Ogerpon. As you mentioned before, putting on so much pressure, getting rid of any weaknesses that you see, and you don't need +1 when you have the Terrifier stat.
No, definitely not. But this is a big switch up. We have not seen this before from Ying Kiat. It is going to be the Tailwind coming through from the Roaring Moon, which is one of the newer utilities that I feel like has also helped to bring Roaring Moon back into relevancy. Of course, we're all also focusing down onto something like Knockoff. That is one of the newer moves that it gets. But Tailwind, what a nice play to be able to set up for the end game and also limit how much Icy Wind drop could be coming through if the Tatsugiri is still in the back.
But that was a huge turn, that Weezing protecting there. Again, playing this protect game with Weezing, figuring out which slots Jasdil really wants to target down. That Ogerpon and Fluttermane able to do no damage to the Weezing, and Roaring Moon getting away with another turn. That's 3 turns in a row. Roaring Moon has not taken damage thanks to a double protect or a correct call. And now that you have Tailwind up on your side, I think if you're Ying, you have a lot more flexibility in terms of offensive pressure. And you're actually able to maybe put your foot down on the gas and start doing some damage.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to see. We're just see that Roaring Moon start to lock into the terrestrialization as well as the acrobatics. But Jasdil's also going to be making a switch up. It's going to be the Dondozo now taking the field instead of that Fluttermane. Dondozo still has a lot of natural bulk to be able to play around. So Jasdil's hoping that this is going to be enough of a pivot here to tank some of the damage that Ying Kiat is going to try to rely upon in this turn.
And with no Tatsugiri, though, there is going to be no commander boost for this Dondozo. How much does this do? That's a decent amount of damage before the Tatsugiri, and I think when you're dealing with Dondozo, you will take any damage before the Tatsugiri gives its boosts.
Yeah, you want to try to whittle it away as quickly as possible. And that Ivy Cudgel just does barely anything, it feels like, to that Weezing. It even is going to be able to get it down into a range to get some recovery back from his Citrus Berry, but this is already becoming a much harder hill to climb here for Jasdil in this game too.
Yeah, and now in a game one position where Jasdil was kind of on the forefront, where they were able to just put down pressure. I think with that tailwind and that double protect, you were able to find yourself in a position where you're able to force the Dondozo on the field now, and you have the opportunity under these tailwind turns really to put out damage. I think you have to really figure out what you're doing on these turns and getting the most out of them. You know, if you do go for a double protect on any of these turns, that feels like a tailwind turn wasted. So going for sludge bombs and going for correct acrobatics as well, you really have to call these turns correctly, because again, that Tatsugiri could come in for that Ogerpon slot here.
Oh, it could, but a really nice spiky shield call for the Hearthflame Ogerpon on Jasdil's side, and just a double protect because you have really no idea where this damage could be coming from. And both of these Pokemon are under such a threat. You've got the Terra Flying Acrobatics here from the Roaring Moon that was going to be able to try to get the knockout onto that Hearthflame Ogerpon, but also just the Sludge Bomb coming through to try to double in and get more damage. You want this Hearthflame Ogerpon out of the way, and hopefully that's also going to pave the way for this Dondozo to get a little bit of recovery back from its leftovers.
Yeah, and that Dondozo already is back in the green with that leftovers, as you mentioned before. It's going to start slowly recovering its HP, and if Ying Kiat does not call correctly when this Tatsugiri comes in, the Ogerpon may be able to get away with another Ivy Cudgel. We saw that the Weezing was actually able to eat it, and with that Citrus Berry, it's going to be able to live another one. And Jasdil really has to call correctly what they want to do with this Pokemon. I think that Double Protect is a great choice from them. Again, in the same way that you don't want to be wasting turns if you're on the Tailwind side, you want to be wasting the Tailwind turns if you're on the opposing side.
Yeah, and what a better way to do that than with just a super bulky Pokemon like Dondozo. I think the only wonder that I have right now is which side is going to get the knockout first. For Jasdil, it's very important to knock out the Weezing before your Dondozo goes down so that you can make the most out of something like the Tatsugiri. But the Will-O-Wisp is just going to miss. That is so unfortunate, as the Ivy Cudgel is finally able to land its mark into the Weezing, but it still doesn't go down. Oh my
and
gosh.
a double up from the Dondozo there to guarantee the KO on that Weezing, realizing that even if you get Will-O-Wisp there, that you just need to get rid of this Weezing. You know the Ivy Cudgel is not going to get KO'd. We are going to see the Ogerpon get that embodiment aspect, getting that +1. Now it's even more of a threat than it was before. The Dondozo getting away this turn, leftovers recovery, no burn, and you have Tatsugiri in the back most likely. This is looking really good for Jasdil all of a sudden.
That was such a shift in the tides. Even though you have this Roaring Moon that is still active with this terrestrialization, and you have this Ogerpon in the back, you need to find a way to actually get this damage down. I guess one of the good things is you are now able to get this Wellspring Ogerpon just kind of in front of this Dondozo, where you know the terrestrialization has already been committed onto the Hearthflame Ogerpon. That Dondozo cannot Terra away from that into the Terra Dragon. So these Horn Leeches are going to hurt. That is a lot of damage.
Yeah, but with no Tailwind now, I think Ogerpon is going to be threatening so much damage, and Roaring Moon, if it does want to keep the pace of the game, might have to go for another Tailwind if you are unconfident that your Water Ogerpon, which usually do like to be built slower, they want that Tailwind so you are able to outspeed and maybe fire off Ivy Cudgel into the Fire Ogerpon. But instead, we see a Tatsugiri switch, maybe calling that play from Jasdil's side, that Dondozo is going to get that Commander boost and maybe threaten strong Wave Crash. Again, this Ogerpon doesn't have Follow Me. It actually is opting for that Swords Dance, so it's not going to be able to redirect those Wave Crashes.
No, but at the very least you have Water Absorb, so that can help to just at least mitigate how much damage that the Wellspring Ogerpon is taking in general, which makes it such a nice bring into this matchup. But the Ivy Cudgel was going the way of that Hearthflame Ogerpon, but now that Tatsugiri has taken its place and also jumped into the Dondozo, it is just not at a threat anymore, and that leaves the Roaring Moon vulnerable here. It's just going to get knocked out. That Tailwind is going to be the final move of this game number 2 for it.
Yeah, and Roaring Moon, not known for its, best physical defenses. Dondozo at +2 now. That wave crash is going to hurt. I think missing that burn was kind of the nail in the coffin for that Roaring Moon. I think if you were able to burn it, you would have been able to get yourself in a position where you would have been able to get Tailwind up, and now you're threatening acrobatics and horn leeches into this Dondozo. But now if you're the Ogre Pawn, you really have to rely on getting those Swords Dances. We are going to see the Flutter Mane here kind of decide what Ying Kiat wants to lock into. You have to remember the Tatsugiri and the Ogre Pawn in the back. So if you do lock into something like that Moon Blast, you do more damage in the moment, but now you're not going to be able to hit something like the Ogre Pawn in the back for a lot of damage, as it would be a resisted hit.
Yes, but what a nice turn to be able to weave in a free sword stance. And if you were worried about the Heartflame Ogre Pawn in the back, well, then you should be worried about the Ogre Pawn on the other side. This Wellspring Ogre Pawn is definitely going to be able to do a ton of damage, especially identifying that the Dondozo in this position can just keep cycling through Protect and get that leftovers healing. But against something like this Ogre Pawn, this is a pretty big threat. I think you just kind of try to get the 1-2 punch and knock out this Tatsugiri as soon as you're able to fill the Dondozo too.
Exactly, and I think Ying Kiat playing around their Tailwind excellently, being able to take advantage that Jasdil was most likely going to protect that turn, like you said, going for that Sword Stance, realizing that they need the Tailwind to outspeed that Fire Ogre Pawn that is on the back that we've already seen. If they are able to keep their Tailwind turns and keep their momentum up, if this Horn Leech is able to pick up the KO on the Dondozo, you find yourself in a position now where you're under Tailwind and you're now threatening +2 Ivy Cudgel into the opposing Ogre Pawn.
Nice to get that Dondozo out of the way, but Jasdil still has that Heartflame Ogre Pawn in the back that proved to be such a formidable force in that game number 1. The only difference here is that, okay, the Tailwind is active, so you should be able to get that outspeed, but you get the Embody aspect back as soon as the Ogre Pawn hits the field. And Tatsugiri has Icy Wind, so I would love to know how these speeds may interact.
Yeah, absolutely. Depending on how these Pokemon are built, we might see the Tatsugiri outspeed Ogre Pawn with this Choice Scarf, depending on if it's slow and bulky, as we see with the Swords Dance sets kind of opt to do as well. And it could be very interesting to see that endgame, because in the same way that Flutter Mane had to lock in a move with its Choice Specs, the Tatsugiri now has to choose a move, and if you lock into Icy Wind, you're not doing a lot of damage to Flutter Mane. I guess you have the Ogre Pawn, for your delete button. Instead, we see the Tatsugiri switch out here.
And that is going to make the Flutter Mane that Jasdil is bringing into that spot just a little bit more vulnerable, as the Spiky Shield too. Very safe turn coming out here from Jasdil. Does not want to potentially lose the Heartflame Ogre Pawn in this moment, and you are buying valuable turns away from this Tailwind, but the critical hit, that definitely hurts. And yeah, you just want to try to get rid of these Tailwind turns now. That's your out.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the double protect in the earlier turns from Ying Kiat. I think Jasdil doesn't even need the double protect, actually, as that Tailwind is going to run out. So when Tatsugiri does come in here, it's going to be the fastest thing on the field with that Choice Scarf, and is threatening a large Icy Wind here. And with Ogre Pawn, we know how much damage it did last game, and that was without +1. So with it now, I would not be surprised at all if both these Pokemon are just able to be deleted. But first, you have to hit Icy Wind.
Yes, you definitely have to hit the Icy Wind, and you also want to make sure that this Flutter Mane is going to be able to do enough damage. That was a very critical choice that Ying Kiat had to make in terms of what you wanted to lock into with the choice specs, but you're now hoping that it's going to be enough. Ying Kiat also just wants to play it safe here. Spiky Shield coming out from the Wellspring Ogre Pawn as the Icy Wind goes through. Of course, hitting into the Protect means that it's not going to be able to drop the speed stat of that Pokemon, but this Flutter Mane now, all eyes are on it to see if it can secure the knockout it wants to.
Exactly, and that protect their Ying Kiat, knowing that Jasdil has to target down this +2 Ogre Pawn that is threatening so much. The Shadow Ball coming out here from Ying Kiat, this is going to do a lot of damage, but not able to get the KO on Ogre Pawn. The Spit F drop not necessarily mattering here, as it's in range of a Shadow Ball and definitely in range of an Ivy Cudgel. This Icy Wind from Tatsugiri is still prevalent on the field, though, but with Ogre Pawn, it could go for something like a Protect again. The Tatsugiri could fire off another Icy Wind. These last few turns are really going to come down to the wire.
They really are. I feel if there's a world where the Ogre Pawn just protects like it does right now, this could be it. We saw Ying Kiat trying to just target down this Ogre Pawn, and this Icy Wind coming through means that that Flutter Mane is now at -2 speed, and this Ogre Pawn is at -1. Surely at this point, Jasdil's Heartflame Ogre Pawn is going to be faster than either of those two Pokemon. And all the while, you're going to see the Spiky Shield just putting in so much work as it's a double target into the Ogerpon.
Yeah, and that's absolutely huge. These protects going back and forth as well. It's kind of dangerous as well, trying to figure out which you want to attack as well, because I think if Jasdil does go for an Ivy Cudgel into the Flutter Mane that other turn instead of going to the Ogerpon Spiky Shield, I think you would have just won the game off the bat there, but that's such a risk to take, not targeting down. We do see a Horn Leech instead, missing the KO on the Water Ogerpon there.
That's a huge miss because now this Ogerpon can strike back with that Ivy Cudgel. It is going to be super effective and get the knockout. And all of a sudden, Ying Kiat has played around all of these turns of Tailwind as well as these big threats on Jasdil's team so effectively. The Shadow Ball into the Tatsugiri, you're just trying to get the knockout here. And if not, how is this Tatsugiri going to be able to knock out both of these Pokemon with the Icy Wind that it's locked into with the Choice Scarf?
Yeah, and I think if Icy Wind was able to, high roll maybe a little bit more, then you would have been able to actually knock out that Ogerpon. But the problem, I think, there is that because of that Spadef drop, I actually mentioned it didn't matter before. It seems like it did there, because if you were able to heal up with the Horn Leash, you might have had the chance to be able to survive another Shadow Ball. But with that Spadef drop, it was all but confirmed here for the Flutter Mane. As we see her fire off that Shadow Ball, picking up the KO on this Tatsugiri, and bringing game 2 to Ying Kiat.
That's going to tie up our series. So, Jasdil and Ying Kiat are both now 1-1 apiece in this best of 3 with so much on the line here for both of their countries. And this has been an intense match as well when you look at how these different adjustments that came through from Ying Kiat's side really paid off in the end. That Roaring Moon, while it was a big amount of offensive pressure, it still ended up actually being even more supportive in nature when you look at the Tailwind and how much that was actually contributing into that game too. So now we get a chance to go into game number 3 and everything's on the line now. This is it. This is going to be the game that decides it all. And I feel like both of these players have identified what they need to bring here, but there is an adjustment on Ying Kiat's side. It is not the Weezing that is going to be on the field to lead things off. It is the Wellspring Ogerpon.
And maybe Ying Kiat heard you and realized that Weezing maybe isn't the call here on that lead. It could be good for something in the back like that Dondozo if you bring it in later. But I think a little bit more of offensive lead with the Ogerpon. Knowing that Jasdil has gone with this Flutter Mane Ogerpon lead, opting in for something like the Water Ogerpon, you are able to threaten a lot more damage with just a Terra Water boosted Ivy Cudgel. You could go for Swords Dance, or you could continue to play defensively and go for a Spiky Shield.
Spiky Shield feels like it's been the flavor of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Going for protects on both sides, a Dondozo and a Weezing and a Roaring Moon, it makes sense that you want to be protecting to either, get the most out of the Dondozo on the field or stalling against Tailwind. It just feels like a good move in this matchup. As an overall, protect is a good move, period.
all around, it's definitely been very good, but also just the additive of the trip damage. If you are able to land like a physical attack into that Spiky Shield, then it can also be very powerful that way. But it is time to go for terrestrialization in this third and final game of the set. It's going to be the Wellspring Ogerpon this time around that's going to be getting the Terra as well as the Embody Aspect boost, which is nice to have that special defense in front of something like this Flutter Mane. Plus, you've got the Tailwind in your sails. That's going to really help this Ogerpon shine.
Yeah, and Ying Kiat taking a note out of Jasdil's book and putting the foot on the gas immediately, turn 1, going for that terrestrialization, Tailwind, and the one-hit KO into the Flutter Mane. That is a huge knockout.
That is absolutely big, especially because it's just going to be a non-Terra Ivy Cudgel going towards that Roaring Moon. It is a critical hit, but look at how well it takes that.
Yeah, absolutely. More than the terrestrialized version for sure. I think with a critical hit, it definitely would have gotten in range a lot closer. I think now that Jasdil has lost their Flutter Mane, that's just one Pokemon they can't pivot into beforehand. The thing about Dondozo is when you have Dondozo Tatsugiri in the back, Ying Kiat is able to play into that very well. So getting rid of the Flutter Mane and then the Ogerpon accordingly kind of forces that Dondozo mode. And Jasdil has a lot less tools to really kind of put the Dondozo in a place where they feel comfortable. And we're already in a position, it's just been accelerated this game, where you have Tailwind and then offensive threat, that being the Ogerpon here from Ying Kiat's side.
And what's really difficult about this board positioning here for Jasdil is that you're in front of this Ogre Pawn. You are weak to a Horn Leech if you are this Dondozo, which may make you feel forced to terrestrialize it. It does have the Terra Dragon, and we are going to see this Heartflame Ogre Pawn leave the field. That Tatsugiri taking its place means that this Commander Boost is active, and this Dondozo mode is set up and committed to for however long this Dondozo is able to survive. But this is looking rough. Like, just to revisit that point, like, you could tear a dragon here, and then what? We saw that Flutter Mane in the back. That is a very much no good place to be.
And Jasdil here going for that Terrestrialization Dragon onto their Dondozo, not really having another option, because if you do go for that Fire Terrestrialization, you would be doing it in front of the Water Ogre Pawn, which is a very risky play, a play you can make, but I'm not sure how much it gets you. The Dragon makes a lot more sense. You are able to resist those Horn Leeches. Coming up from the Ogre Pawn here, the Acrobatic's going to be missing that Tatsugiri switch in. They had doubled into that slot, which makes a lot of sense, right? You want to force the Dondozo, even if your attacks don't go off in that slot. You're not trying to do damage that turn. You want to force the Terrestrialization on Dondozo, and you want to force that Ogre Pawn out so that Dondozo is now on the field.
Yeah, Dondozo's going to get a speed boost too, so that order up is actually going to be very helpful. You still have the Tailwind active on Ying Kiat's side, so you can take advantage of that for one more turn. But this Flutter Mane, this is what I was referring to. With the Flutter Mane in the back and forcing out the Terra onto the Dondozo, you're all of a sudden going to be able to take the Ogre Pawn matchup a little bit better, but what about this Flutter Mane?
Yeah, Dondozo, even with its +2 from that Commander boost, does not want to be eating a Choice Specs Moonblast from Flutter Mane, even without Terrestrialization. It does so much damage, and something like Ivy Cudgel here, right? You're going for a resisted move on the Dondozo anyways. Going for a critical hit with Ivy Cudgel is probably your best bet here with Ogre Pawn. You could even go for a Swords Dance, as we saw in that game too, just taking advantage. That does a solid 50% to Dondozo, and getting that special attack drop, you know, not mattering too much, but Ivy Cudgel also going to fire off here.
Yeah, like that is just an easy way to start chunking down that Dondozo. You're sadly not going to get the critical hit, which means that this Dondozo gets a chance to fire back with a Wave Crash, but you've done so much damage already. There was 50% to you. You're taking recoil from the Wave Crash as well. That's already bringing Dondozo down into the red. You are going to get some leftover sealing, and I definitely see this next turn being something like a cycle through a Protect, get some more leftover sealing, but this is the adjustment I wanted to see in that game too. The Lander is now going to be in the back as that fourth and final here for Ying Kiat.
And I'm really curious there if the Dondozo, you know, what the Landers really wants to lock into there. We see the Speed Booster, or excuse me, we saw that the Dondozo was that speed boosting. So I'm really curious to see how they're going to be able to navigate, right? This Dondozo most likely is going to go for Protect. And as these Tailwind turns start to run out for Ying Kiat, that speed boost on the Dondozo is going to start to matter more and more depending on how it's EV'd.
I think what you get, I guess, it could be one more turn. So you're +1 now. Tailwind's going to expire. You do end up having a Choice Scarf here onto the Landorus, but are you able to actually do enough damage? This Landorus with the Choice Scarf is going to be locking into the Stomping Tantrum, which we get to see really a cool interaction. Yes, talk us through that.
That was a really smart play there from Ying Kiat, realizing, again, taking advantage of when the Dondozo wants to Protect on Jasdil's side, going for a Swords Dance on the Ogre Pawn, but notably going for a Stomping Tantrum into the Tatsugiri slot. As we know, Stomping Tantrum, when it does hit into a target or fails, as we saw there, targeting into the Tatsugiri, which is in the Dondozo's mouth, you are going to get double boosted power here on the Stomping Tantrum, and let's see if this picks up the KO on Dondozo.
Oh, it's so close. But the Horn Leech will finish it off, and that is the power that you were just talking about, which is you get that double boost, and even if you're not able to get the knockout completely, that brought you down well enough to be able to get the actual knockout onto the Dondozo and make that Tatsugiri reappear. What a smart play. You still, though, have a mountain to climb. You've got this Heartflame Ogre Pawn back on the field alongside that Tatsugiri, and if my calculations are correct, that Landorus is 4 times weak to something like an Icy Wind.
Yeah, and I think that's really scary as well, right? If you are staring, I do think Landers is going to be able to eat, one Icy Wind as it's not stabbed from the Tatsugiri. It definitely
Mhm.
is doing more damage than you want and, allows the Ogre Pawn to outspeed you, which is the important thing here, so it can fire off the Horn Leech. But as you talked about very early in this game, both these players are very fond of Spiky Shield, which we don't see here actually, but does over 50% to that Landorus. No Spiky Shield from the Ogre Pawn here on Ying Kiat's side. Very interested to see what Jasdil locked in here.
I think it's just going to be oh yeah, it's just the Horn Leech there into the Wellspring Ogre Pond. So an easy one-hit knockout to be able to remove that Pokemon from the field. And Yinkyat is starting to run out of Pokemon in this game. And so you need to be able to hit the Stomping Tantrum. This Tatsugiri is still going to be able to take it. And so it's just as Landorus against the rest of the world right now. Still has these two Pokemon. And would you ever have thought that a Tatsugiri would finish out this game 3?
I did not. With the Ogre Pawn finishing out all the damage and with that Terastallization getting all those boosts, it took so many KOs that game. But seeing a Tatsugiri getting the KO on that Landorus was just hilarious to see. But congratulations there to Jasdil, going to be taking the game 2-1. Well played set from both players. Really excellently played.